Well, welcome back to Along the Road. I'm Pastor Josh here in Kingston, New Hampshire.
And I'm Katie, the Children's Discipleship Director here at Kingston.
And we have a lot of fun here just hanging out, talking about faith, about different topics of faith, and how we intersect with that. The practical views, the sometimes biblical views, the world views, the challenges, all those things. And so today we're talking about the word called Sabbath. Not a word that we use very often these days.
Nope.
And
sounds a little old-fashioned.
Sounds a little old-fashioned, unless you're a Messianic Jew, and then you might talk about Shabbat, which is the Jewish way of saying Sabbath, and they have established some time frames for that, what that means. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about Sabbath itself and what it means and what it is. It's established mostly as God does creation. And you can read through Genesis chapter 1, you can read all the story of creation, how God creates all the things that are there. He creates man at the end of chapter 1. But at the beginning of chapter 2, it says, "By the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done." And so what's interesting to me, at least at first glance, is that God rested, it says, from the work of creating that he had done. Not that God rested because he was tired.
Right. That's critical, isn't it?
That's very critical. Not that God rested from everything else and did nothing. He still was sustaining the world and still ruling and being a God as well. So later on, you'll see through the covenant and through Moses and others, God established this day as a holy day, this time to set aside to rest from your work. God was working in creation, so to rest from your work. And the rhythm of life is interesting. Of course, in America, or here in the United States of America, we have a weekend. We have Saturdays and Sundays off.
Sort of,
depending on who you are. So is it days off, Sabbath? So the question really is, what does Sabbath mean? How do you observe it? You can get very technical, very legal about it. So I think we can just start there. What does Sabbath mean? You said you had a definition of Sabbath.
I do. So this book is Dallas Willard's The Great Omission.
Okay.
And here's what he says. "We strongly need to see the manifest hand of God in what we are and what we do. We need to be sure he is pulling the load, bearing the burden, which we are all too ready to assume is up to us alone. We must understand that he is in charge of the outcome of our efforts, and that the outcome will be good, right. And all of this is encompassed in one biblical term, Sabbath. Sabbath is a way of life. It sets us free from bondage to our own efforts. Only in this way can we come to the power and joy of a radiant life in ministry and work, a blessing to all we touch. And yet, Sabbath is almost totally absent from the existence of contemporary Christians and their ministers. What is Sabbath? Biblically, it is mainly a day, once a week, when we do no work."
That's very interesting. It's that last couple words that I think are extremely important.
Do no work?
Do no work.
Yeah.
And it depends on what you mean by work.
Yes, it does.
As well. So it's very interesting. I have an uncle or uncle-in-law. He's a farmer, pig farmer, but he also has lots of cornfields as well in Iowa, a lot of cornfields. And planting season and harvest season, the farmers are out there sun up, past sundown, and they are going all the time. And what's interesting that I learned from him many years ago is he chooses on Sunday to park all his tractors and not harvest, which is very odd in time of harvest. Whether, he doesn't belabor anybody else who chooses, that's their choice, but he says he sets that aside as a time to put the work aside and to look to God and to spend time with the Lord, with his family, very important. And it's interesting because many would say he's crazy. How are you going to get the harvest done? It's a lot of land, it's a lot of push. And so kind of like what Dallas said, in one sense, on the work side, he's trusting that the Lord will give him the time he needs the ability or whatever it takes, or will provide enough for whatever he does harvest. But he's also just saying, I need, in the rhythm of life, to set aside this time. I still think he works in the sense of if his wife wants him to do something or this, there's still work to do, but it's not his work, if that makes sense.
It's not what he's a farmer, but
it's not his occupation.
What he's paid.
Yeah, it's not what he's paid to do. It's not that, and I think that's an important distinction in what you do. The setting aside of time, rhythm of life, I think is a good way to put it. In the Old Testament, they would set aside that time, not just with what they were paid to do, but just the busyness is set aside. In the New Testament, culture, the busyness is set aside, and we gather together. We call that church. Now, church around here has become church on Saturday, church on Sunday, online church, which you do. So do you count going to church as part of the Sabbath? So do you count going to church as part of the Sabbath?
I would think so.
Okay.
Because it's setting aside other things you could do to pay attention to God and to be with his family.
I think in general, I would say yes to that. But on a personal level, I don't.
I understand that
yes,
too, because it's what you get paid to do.
It's what I get paid to do, and when I am here on a Saturday night, on a Sunday, it is a height of my work. Yeah. It is the busiest part of my work.
The culmination.
It is every week. You're exposing yourself. You're putting things out. You're moving leadership. You're doing these things. And Saturday night, because we have a Saturday service, and Sunday, I work. I work all those days.
So, what about when you're on vacation?
When I'm on vacation, it takes about 2 or 3 days, and then the whole time is Sabbath. Yeah.
Right, but in terms of church.
Oh yeah, in terms of church on vacation, we can do it personally, as a family, or if we go somewhere, it's nice as well. And then I would count that. I see Sabbath slightly different in our American context, especially with my job, with what I do. And I think, especially with the way the world is today, or people are working six days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. Like Sabbath needs to be a time where you set aside and rest. I get that part. It goes back to a conversation I think we had earlier about having boundaries in life, And so I have certain boundaries in life. I typically take what might be called a Sabbath, a set aside from work, Sunday afternoon through most of Monday, maybe Monday afternoon. I typically don't come to the office on Mondays. I try not to answer emails, phone calls, like none of the work stuff on Mondays. And it sets everything aside. I can reset, be personal about it. It is different. So there are people who come here on a Saturday night service because they have to work on Sunday morning.
Right.
But the question I would ask them is not, hey, well, you came to Saturday night service. That's only an hour and a half. Right. The Sabbath was meant to be a day that you set aside of resting in him, of trusting in him, and counting on God for these things. So, and I would say that to someone who comes Sunday morning and then just goes about their busyness anyway. Where's that larger period that you're setting aside, and not just filling it with a bunch of extra busyness? There's a point to Sabbath that I think emotionally and spiritually fills your tank. But even Dallas Willard said it also should help point us to the one that is doing all this work.
Reminding us that it's not our strength
right.
that's accomplishing all these things.
Yeah, and I think that's very important to think through those. So yeah, we come here, we have a service. It's good to gather, have people come together. But I think part of the challenge is, and I think that was a challenge in, especially when Jesus was on the earth, that they become so strict about the Sabbath, about what it meant, sundown to sunup, no work, no this. So we have lights on a timer, so I don't have to flick a light switch. That's considered work.
Right.
There are messianic
food you prepare ahead of time, so you don't have to.
Yeah.
You could only walk thus
certain
far
distance and where you went.
Yeah.
And even modern day Jewish people will do that, and lights on a timer or food that's prepared because they're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. and to turn and flip the light switch would be considered work.
Right.
And I think that's taking, and we do this often with scriptures, taking that and driving it so far that it becomes the checklist as opposed to the heart of what Sabbath is.
Mm-hmm.
And that heart is, I'm not working. Like I often will go for runs on those days.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean I'm breaking Sabbath? That's the question.
Right.
I feel a lot better after my run. I contemplate the sermon that I feel I messed up the day before. I do that, and you gotta, but all that is part of this.
It's a way you reset.
I do. I use
and so if that's the purpose of Sabbath, resetting, then that's not work.
On a Monday, it's typically my day off. I'll make sure my wife and I would go somewhere and spend time together away from the normal, and so those types of things are important. In our day and age with, traveling soccer and volleyball and all these things, people are gone all weekend long. What are you teaching your kids in your Sabbath? How important it is just to show up at church. Let's get in there for our hour and then we go do our thing.
Right.
Does that really show a Sabbath?
Or do we skip church because our thing is overlapping?
We skip church; it's overlapping.
We'll see it later online.
We can do it later. Yeah. And I know families that do that, but they do that faithfully and they spend time. That doesn't mean you never do that. Like if in my family, if we're having soccer games or different things, and then once in a year or something happens on that weekend, that's not an established routine of just throwing it out there.
Right. There's a special tournament.
There's something like that, and I understand that. But for the most part, what you model matters, and that to me, Sabbath coincides with work. So when you come home at night, are you still dealing with pulling out your phone, answering work emails, and doing this with work and where you're going? Or have you put that work aside because your work is the family at that point? I'm a guy, so we compartmentalize. Work here, work at the family, work, but there are people who don't. So then they overwork. And what does that model to the child, to the family? What does that express to the spouse? Either way, husband to wife or wife to husband, that these things are more important. This work is less important, and having that balance and the structure of that balance, I think it's thrown off. And so I think it can be hard with families that need to work for financial reasons.
Right.
Kids have lots of needs.
Really?
Kids have lots of needs. But they also have lots of wants. They want to be on a team. They want to do these things. And sometimes we're told we will struggle as believers in a world that doesn't believe. To say we can be on this team, but we can play on Saturdays, and for the most part, unless once a special occasion, we're not going to play on Sundays, or we're going to choose this to this time, or from Saturday afternoon until Sunday afternoon, there's a period there where we're not doing those things. Mm-hmm. You have some later in the afternoon, okay,
right.
And so you kind of find that time of modeling the spiritual kind of step back and reset. Mm-hmm. And I think that's hard to do these days.
Oh, it's really hard because the world clamors the other way. The interesting thing that I came across in thinking about this is that it's like tithing, in the sense that if you give your first tenth to the Lord, then God will make those 9/10 stretch to cover what the whole would.
Yeah.
And so in Sabbath, if you honor him by setting aside that time, he will enable you to get done in the 9/10, if you will, or the 6/7.
Yeah.
What was taking you the full time to do.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't know why I didn't put those two together.
Right.
In terms of how God's economy, if you will. But that was really helpful to
me. I think that's interesting because there are a lot of times I'll even say in the non-spiritual world, in the work world, if you get overwhelmed with things, sometimes go take a break.
Yeah.
Go take a nap.
Yep.
Go do this. And when you come back, you have a new focus. Certain things have gone away and you can begin accomplishing those little things, little tasks quicker. And I think Sabbath does that for us. in a spiritual sense. Maybe you do yours in the middle of the week on a Wednesday. I don't know what day, And in our world, it's which day you have off of work. In the biblical world, every day was an important day because a lot of them were farming for themselves and doing this, and you have to tend these things. So not tending to that for a day or not taking care of these things would be a big deal. Like I said, the American culture has the weekend, where technically from Friday night until Monday morning, most people may not work, or there's a 2-day period.
Yeah.
But I think especially in our economy today, some people are adding in extra work or doing extra time to do that. I find I work for the most part almost 6 days a week. My Saturdays are a little weird because of our Saturday service.
Sure. And
I kind of work on Saturday morning, do some things with the family, and then Saturday night we're here. But having one full day or period of time, larger period of time, where I set aside not to do the work, but to do the relaxing, not laying down. Like for me, relaxing sometimes is running. That's why I say that. And I know I want to establish that the relaxing doesn't mean you have to go lay down and just read a book. Maybe that's not your thing. Maybe that doesn't fill your tank, or it's not, you need something, and I need something to kind of shake out all the stress, anxiety, and the running always helps. And so you utilize that with a purpose,
Intentionally.
It is intentional. Often as I'm stretching and getting ready, I think of a couple of things that are bothering me. I think of, or maybe the next sermon, this is what I'm thinking of. And I just kind of like ask that question a couple times in my head, do that before I either go for my run or if I'm on the treadmill before I do that. It kind of works itself out somehow. I don't know, it's a weird thing. But because I intentionally, it's a God thing. It is. But because I intentionally said, here, this is what I'm contemplating. This is what's bugging me. Now I'm going to go for my run. And I don't always sit there and have that conversation in my head, but I might be thinking about a tree or watching something else. And then boom, it kind of comes. And that's that moment where God's like, here, I'm filling this up. I'm giving this to you. And I think that's important for us to seek after. And like you said with tithing, it's very hard at first.
To trust.
To do. I know some people who tithe 5% and then 6%, maybe get up to 10%. And tithe is not required to be 10% or less or more. I know people that have lived a life where they have gotten to a point where they're tithing 50%. And that's one of the things that they work through. So, like that, if you learn to Sabbath, you learn to set aside time. Maybe it's just half a day at the beginning.
Sure.
You learn to quiet heart and mind. You learn to do that in fellowship with a spouse or with just a few people, because I think it then begins to grow into something you desire.
Meals are a fun way.
Sometimes, like if I'm hosting the meal, that's work. I don't want to be hosting the meal. Meals, so I mean, it depends. Some people, that's like fills them up. They're hosting the meal, they love it, and this is it, and they can enjoy that. And so, you find you have to know yourself. You have to understand that. But that's why I say boundaries are important.
Yeah.
My boundary on Sabbath is I might have a much smaller group, 2 or 3 people at the most. But for the most part, if I inundate with a whole bunch of people, then I'm right back to where I was. Too many people, too many things, and I feel like I'm in what situation I'm in. So understanding that matters.
Yes.
That's why when you said on vacation, if I go to another church, I don't feel the same way.
Right.
It is odd being a pastor. You go somewhere where you're not the pastor. And
you don't have to run anything.
You don't have to run anything, but then, you also have to learn to shut the brain off. In that sense, where you're going, and you're watching the process and watching this. I would do this. I could use that, and I could
the analyzing.
I'm here with my family. I'm here here to hear what God has for me today. And so I think anyone who works in any field and goes to visit the same field, they would do the same thing. It's very much a temptation. So,
like talking shop.
It is like no talking shop today. It is very much like talking shop. So so you can learn to kind of stretch that out. I've been on what they call Sabbath retreats. Have you ever been on any type of Sabbath retreat?
I haven't.
I've been on one. They called it a silent retreat.
Yes,
actually.
I've heard of them, but I've never actually been on.
Yeah, I remember in seminary it was an option we had, and we went on a silent retreat. I think it was 3 days and 2 nights. Very interesting process. And I'll never forget the way they established part of it. They kind of talked to you a bit in the beginning, what you're going to deal, what's going to be like. You have your room. We have meal times. Meal times are pretty much silent. And then there's the evening vespers where there is singing and praying. Not conversing, but you are speaking in some ways, And so most of your day is in silent in your room or walking the property or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, don't be surprised if you fall asleep in the beginning. You're so used to all the noise.
Uh-huh.
You don't realize how tired your body is. And I think I probably slept 7 hours the first day. I was trying to be quiet, I'm going to take this seriously.
Gone.
It was gone. Yeah, and I realized there's a lot more to the quietness that is important.
Yeah.
That is needed. Taking that time away. You don't have your phone. You don't have anything. It is just you and the Word, or you and nature and the Word, and establishing those things. And even meal times are interesting because you're together, but you're not talking and chatting. What's going on here? What's going on?
Right.
You're just enjoying the meal. You're enjoying the presence of people, and it forces your mind to think of different things, to focus on what God has for you. And I think Sabbath does that for us.
Yeah, I know there's a great temptation going back a little bit.
Yeah.
Concept of a weekend.
Yeah.
I think there's a great temptation to say, okay, the weekend is for me to get done everything I didn't get done during the week.
Yeah. Yeah, there's my housework.
Housework or yard work or answering emails. I mean, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
It's really hard to fight that.
It is. Or that's where I say a lot of people with children, they're filling that up with the extra kid things, do the stuff, and it's hard. It's hard to fight that. It's hard to understand that. That's why I like to talk about it as rhythms of life. The rhythm of life is my rhythm at my occupation, my rhythm at home, what we're doing. So you're establishing doing maybe some of those little things during the week so the weekend is easier. If not, your house would be a complete mess. If that's the day you have to clean it, that's the day you have to clean it. I understand that, But, okay, but where am I going to set aside a good block? Not a 1 hour we run to church thing.
Yeah.
Maybe church is the beginning of Sabbath, and you're going to establish that until a certain time that evening. And you're going to say, okay, for the next 5 hours, 6 hours, start there. We're going to go to church. We're going to come home. We're going to be together. No one's going to have their phones out. And we're going to do this until this time. And then, you know what? We've got to get the laundry done. I've got to do that. And that's fine.
Right. Now we got to get ready for the week.
But imagine what that does to a child, to a youth, to a teenager. We are mom and dad set aside this time. We set aside as a family. We spend some time together. We go with the body. And now we're over here and we're doing this and we're spending time together, or just time independently quiet in the house. Mm-hmm. That's a thing. Imagine that.
Wow.
That's a thing. Be independently quiet in the house, and you can do the same. And you're not working on your project or your, the hobby that you have, just for, like I said, it doesn't have to be a whole day at first, just for a short period of time, and let the family feel that Sabbath. Mm-hmm. We put it all away. And if maybe you go to church like here, maybe you come to 8:30 service, you say, we're putting it all away until an hour after lunch. That's a good 4 or 5 hours. Mm-hmm. We're going to spend time together, or if we're in the house, we'll have some quiet hours. You can read, you can do this, but we're not online. We're not on screens. We're just establishing this way. If you want to talk, we can have a conversation. There's some people out there that have, conversation cards, conversation starters.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That are really good, to use in family settings. There's what I call ones that are good for families, so that would be a thing that you could use as well, especially as the kids get older, or if you have adult kids that are still at home. But that establishes a rhythm. Saturday morning, here's a rhythm. Here's our Saturday. We have a Saturday morning rhythm of cleaning, and certain people do laundry, and you kind of walk through that rhythm, and it doesn't take the entire day. Coming home is a rhythm. Coming home for me, coming home for the children, there's a rhythm to what that means. Like at our house, we have often, after dinners, reading, shower up, reading in quiet. We spend time bringing it down purposefully. I mean, you could call those mini Sabbath times.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're bringing it down purposely. Then we come in, maybe devotional before bedtime and sing doxology and walk through that. But it establishes this rhythm that sometimes we put it away and we're quiet. Or we'll read, and then together we'll do some speaking of who God is and what that means in our life. And that type of
How
stuff.
you saw God today or whatever.
Yeah, we
Sure.
talk about that. You know, highs and lows. How did that make you feel? Where's God in this? Those types of things. And so I think how you treat Sabbath, time apart,
Mm-hmm.
to focus on God and let Him refill you, is good for you, but it's also good because it models to the world around you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're married, one spouse to the other, with children, or if you're a grandparent and kids come to your house for the weekend, hey, this is our Sabbath time. You know, and the kids will learn that, oh yeah, when we're with grandma and granddad, we're quiet after lunch for an hour before we go outside and play.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You know, or granddad reads us a story from the Bible first. You know, so there's lots of ways to do this, but it models to them that, hey, this is important to set aside.
Different.
Yeah. It is different. And to the world, it's different. And why do you take that time off? Why do you not involve yourself all the time? Because we love to fill up the schedule with busyness.
Well, and our culture tells us we have to.
Yeah.
If you're not doing blah, 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 blah,
Yeah,
then why not?
exactly.
Get to it.
We love to fill up our house with DIY projects. You know, how many ones do you have started sitting around? You know, I have a couple. So I know that for sure. We love to do that. And then that way we're always having something to do. Something to do means I haven't spent time to sit quiet with God. And that can be, well, for me at first it's scary. Because that means quiet with God means quiet with my thoughts too. And, you know, we're like, oh, my brain is crazy. And I don't like to be with my crazy brain sometimes. And so letting the quietness settle in is important.
It is.
I think
It
fills
is.
us
And
up.
it renews you for the week.
It does.
So that then you have the energy you need to plow through whatever the week brings.
But what I've also found, it does that, but I've also found, like, if we do an evening, like an hour here, if I said, I can get into that mode faster than I would have had I never practiced it over here. So I can get into
that's
this
nice.
mode, you
Yeah.
know, learning, like, that's why I say sometimes going on vacation is hard the first couple of days to get the brain out, but, like, once you start practicing that, even, like, as we're approaching vacation, I'm already, I got to check these boxes, so I'm faster into that mode of setting this aside and letting the tank fill up. So you can get into that mode faster because you have established the rhythm of being able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's I'm going to take some time in the middle of the day. I'm going to go walk the park with my packed lunch that I tell them, I'm going to go walk the park and just be quiet with the Lord as I do that. And you can do that better and faster because you practice that rhythm. You know.
Yeah, it makes
So
a
you
lot of sense.
middle of the week fill up. So mini Sabbath, full Sabbath. Yeah, I don't get into the legal versions of what it is. It doesn't have to be Sunday. It doesn't have to be Saturday night. But I would say it should be a bigger block of time than just showing up at a church meeting.
Mm-hmm.
The fellowship is important, but it's more than just showing up in a church meeting. It is this set aside of something different to fill up.
Yeah.
And as Dallas said, you know, then it makes us rely on God.
That's right.
And I think that's most important.
It gives us it reorients us to the right perspective.
Yeah, and we need to. We need to do that, according to God, every week. Because if we don't, we will quickly forget, as Israel quickly forgot, as even the early church quickly forgot in different ways, and Paul had to write to them and remind them, you know, we quickly forget. That's why these rhythms are important.
Yeah.
That's even why, like, the Lord's Supper, do this as regularly as you can, as often as possible, because we quickly forget.
Yeah.
You know,
And that's why they built piles of stones.
That's right. We call those our Ebenezers. You know, here they are.
What are they there for? Oh, let me tell you.
This is a reminder. This is what it's here for. This is what happened. Here's how God worked.
Right.
So I would encourage you, think about your Sabbath. Think about mini Sabbath, full Sabbath. But really, what does it mean? How are you using it? And what does it tell the world, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews? What does it tell the world around you? What does it model to them? But I encourage you, take some time to truly Sabbath and set aside and let God fill your tank.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, until then, we'll see you next week.
Take care.